Hello everyone, we're here to talk about the data warehouse enhancements that's included as part of Clarity 16.0.0. Specifically, as part of this release, we are making the following changes to the data warehouse functionality. Most of it is to improve the job performance, and some of it is just based on customer request. The changes that we are providing in this is the new data fields that will be added to the data warehouse, enhanced load data warehouse incremental job performance, continued improvements to how the data is synchronized between the transactional and data warehouse. This is something we started in the last PI, or in fact, it's something that we focus every release, and we did some more in this current release, and we'll discuss that. And finally, based on customer request, we have now provided the ability to access OData in our SaaS environment using Clarity API keys. So let's first discuss the new data points that we'll be synchronizing. So in this release, we have added the time entry note date as a field that will be synchronized between transactional and data warehouse. On the screen, you can see the specific table and the attributes, or the columns where the data will be synchronized. So in the transactional, the PR note tables, PR note date will be added to the two respective tables in the data warehouse. We've also added the newly introduced attribute, the parent attribute. This is the parent attribute was introduced in the last PI in the investment object. That is now going to be available to you in the data warehouse, and those are the respective tables. In the transactional, this is the INV investment parent ID, and then the two respective tables in the data warehouse. The performance improvement that we've done to the load data warehouse job in this release is more targeted towards the resource table. So every PI we've done some incremental changes. This release, we are focusing on the data in the data warehouse resource table. The specifics of that will be discussed in the next slide as to what exactly we are updating. But in essence, what we're doing is the resource changes will only be updating the specific attributes in the resource data warehouse resource tables. So it's more targeted updates rather than updating all the lookups in every table anytime there is a change. In addition, the data synchronization process is moved, or some of the data synchronization process is moved from Pentaho scripts to an actual database procedure that allows faster replication. Essentially, in this case, we've done is for the multi-value lookup, data synchronization has been moved as a stored procedure. This change in this release is only done for PostgreSQL, which affects all our Broadcom SaaS environments and customers, and will be made in Oracle and SQL Server in the next PI. We've also updated Pentaho version. So till now, we were using Pentaho 5. Starting Clarity 16.0.0, we are now going to be using Pentaho version 9. This allows several improvements within Pentaho itself, as well as better performance and better synchronization. Speaking of the selective resource update, what will happen now is that when a resource property data changes, like the primary role or a manager, the resource availability facts will not be updated unless the resource availability hour are also updated. So again, it's selective updates based on the change that was done. Investment manager name change will only update the DWH resource table and manage attribute in the INV investments table. When a resource is updated, if the resource name does not change, then we no longer update any lookup tables based on resource name. Previously, we used to update every lookups. Now we are only updating the lookups as necessary. And then finally, updating the resource lookup and availability facts have historically been very costly activities. So we've optimized that to make sure that it's only updated when necessary. The following are the new procedures that we've added to replace the functionality that used to be handled in Pentaho in the past. Having the stored procedure, it allows us to do the replication a lot faster than going through Pentaho itself. So these are, again, some improvements that you will continue to see as we keep adding more and more changes to improve the data warehouse functionality. The other change that we've done, so in the last release, we introduced the created date. So just as a reminder, there was an issue that if someone is modifying a data while the data warehouse job was executing, then that would result in the record not getting synchronized. In fact, in that scenario, the entire record would just not be there. To address that, we introduced a created date column, which would basically tell us that at what time we should use the created date to use for that specific column that got modified while the synchronization was running. We only had it for selected tables in the previous release. However, in this release, we've extended that functionality for other parts of Clarity application synchronization. Specifically, those are listed right here on the screen. There are about 18 other places where we've added this created date to address that specific functionality. This should also help a lot with the performance as well as the data reliability. Finally, the other change that we've done is customers that are in our SaaS environment and have enabled SSO for authentication have asked us ways to ensure that they can connect to OData in that environment using some either the API key or SSO mechanism rather than just the basic auth. We looked at different options, and for a headless connection that OData is, which essentially is an API connection, the best option that was out there was to go with the API method. So in this release, what we are doing is now we are going to allow customers to connect to the OData API using the Clarity API keys. This will work with OData v2 and v4. This allows the administrator to have control as to who can connect to the OData using the API keys in the SSO environment. The API keys work similar to the, it is the Clarity API keys, so they can be configured exactly the same way like any others, where you have to first define a client and then the end users can create their own API keys using that client. The syntax for the basic authentication still remains the same, where for the username, you will use the Clarity username followed by the OData authenticator. The OData authenticator value, as you are aware, can be seen in each environment by navigating to the OData URL, the OData URL page within Clarity. And then the password is the password you define in Clarity. However, if you're going to use the API keys, the syntax is slightly changed, and now you need to pass an additional value, and that is the API client ID. This is the same client ID that the administrator would define in Clarity under the modern UX administration. The syntax is the API client ID followed by the pipe sign, then the username, the pipe sign, and then the OData authenticator. The password is going to be your actual API key itself that is generated by the system, so that each end user will have their own API key. All rules still apply to this API key, such as the expiration date, and if the API client is disabled, then the API keys will stop working. So again, giving more control and access to the administration. As part of the section, since a lot of these changes are at the back end, there will not be any specific demo. That concludes this section.